welcome to the Agtually podcast, where we learn about farming and food from the people who actually grow and process it. I'm your host, Sheridan. Join me as I learn as much as I possibly can about agriculture and food production. Thank you so much for being here. Hi, editing Sheridan here. So I just wanted to pop in before the episode starts and talk about a couple things. First of all, I give a little explanation about why I chose just a normal Christian farmer to talk about ethics rather than an ethics professional. But to add on to that, I wanted to talk about the fact that according to the USDA, over 90% of farms in America are family owned. And then according to, I don't know the exact website, but according to online, around 80% of farmers are Christian. So if you take that 90-ish% of family farms and then also that 80-ish% who are Christian, the overwhelming majority are the overwhelming majority of farmers are just your average family farm Christian farmers. So I think that's important to keep in mind. The other thing has to do with a definition. So later in the episode, you'll hear my dad talk about a cow chewing her cud. This is what cows do to digest their food. So because they're ruminant animals, they can't digest grass and hay. Well, they can, but first they eat it and they regurgitate it and chew it and then swallow it and regurgitate it and chew it. And this helps break it down so that they're able to digest it. Now, cows only chew their cud when they are content, when they feel safe, when they're happy. So if a cow is in distress, if she's stressed out, if she's uncomfortable, she's not going to be chewing her cud. So that's something to keep in mind. I think that's it. Enjoy the episode. Today, my dad, Kelly, has agreed to sit down and talk to me about ethics, specifically the ethics of farming. Kelly was born and raised on his father's dairy farm, and except for a brief stint as an engineer, has always been a dairyman. But it's been about 8 years now since he's had to sell the farm and put dairying behind him. But he's still involved in agriculture. Some of you might be wondering why I chose to interview a dairyman to discuss this topic rather than an ethics professional. But I chose my dad because of his Christianity. Ethics and morals are at the heart of Christianity, and often nominal Christians will twist biblical truths to excuse wrong behavior. So I thought it would be important and practical to interview a Christian farmer who takes the Bible seriously and lets it influence his actions and decisions when it comes to the treatment of land and animals. I also believe that Christians have a higher stake in this because if we believe what the Bible says, then it's our God-given responsibility to care for the land and the animals that have been entrusted to us. I'm also thinking about trying to find someone else to interview on this subject to kind of get a different perspective. But Dad, thank you so much for sitting down with me. Before we get started, can you tell me a little bit about your background in agriculture and how you're still involved in it?
Sure. And as you said, I grew up on the farm, but really I think I was fourth generation. So your grandpa, obviously, and my grandpa, and I think my dad's grandpa were all farmers in northwest Iowa. And then, of course, your grandpa and me were the first here in Arizona. And then, so that's, I guess I was born into it. That's how I got into agriculture.
Mm-hmm. And how are you still involved in it?
Well, it kind of gets in your blood. It's hard to get away. Mm-hmm. So I'm still involved in selling animal hygiene, facilities hygiene, animal care products, and also servicing equipment for dairy farms. Okay.
And you still have a few cattle, right? And you raise some for beef?
Right. We still have probably 30 cattle.
All right. And the topic of ethics can be kind of tricky because a lot of it depends on a person's worldview. Mm-hmm. So why don't we start there? Can you tell me what your worldview is?
Yeah. So my worldview is that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and all the animals. And then finally, he created man in his image. And so built on that worldview, animals we're to be stewards of the animals and of all of creation, really, and to take care of it, make it produce, and and just be good stewards of what God has given us.
Okay. How does this impact your treatment of animals?
Well, I think as a steward of the creation, I have a responsibility to use them well, to make the creation produce, to not, you don't abuse it, but you don't leave it alone either. You have to take hold of it and make it produce. And the cool thing about animal agriculture is you're able to help feed the world while you care for part of God's creation.
In dairying as a whole, would you say that this sentiment is largely similar to your own, like for caring for animals?
I think so. I mean, I think, as I said, in the beginning, God created it all good and perfect, and unfortunately, Adam didn't obey and subjected himself and the creation to futility. So it's not easy anymore to make a living. It's not easy to make the land produce. And so, but I think that's innate in all of us. We know what's right and wrong. And as far as animal agriculture goes, I think it's just, even if you don't have that underlying worldview that you're supposed to be stewards and that, you're responsible to God for how you treat the animal, I think it's just in your own self-interest to treat them well. The thing that I think, the misrepresentation that gets out there is that, farmers are just going to abuse their animals, wring every last dollar they can out of them, because they're greedy. But animals don't work that way. Throughout history, humans have undergone some pretty horrendous mistreatment, concentration camps, forced marches. The human spirit is able to stand up under that and take that. An animal's not going to do that. An animal, you're not going to abuse the animal. The animal's going to give up and not produce. And you're in the business to make money from your animals. So the animal that's going to be the most efficient, the most profitable, is the healthy, content, well-fed, well-treated animal. Mm-hmm. And so I think, whether or not the rest of the dairy industry thinks about that, that's the principles that we're working off. We're businessmen. We're not idiots, And so, I think by and large, dairymen are responsible and they understand that. And of course, like I said before, I think Adam fell. And so in all of us, there are exceptions and examples that are unfortunate that you see, but by and large, it's not the majority.
It's not the majority who mistreat their animals. Okay.
Yes. And I don't know that anyone really mistreats their animals. I just don't believe that that's not intentionally.
Okay. Well, there is the variable of employees.
Yes.
So have you ever caught any of your employees mistreating animals, and what have you done about that?
I was thinking about that question. I don't remember any specific example of gross mistreatment. I think I witnessed employees handling them roughly, but I think a culture is established on a farm, and the culture will dictate how the employees handle the animals and treat them and all. And so on our farm, it wasn't I think the culture was there that we're going to treat them well. Mm-hmm. And if they're rough or they don't understand how to handle an animal, then we'd educate them and talk to them. Never had to fire anyone over mistreatment, but I would see them get rough from time to time, but then you correct them.
Okay.
And you explain to them that we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm. So. And is that what you think a lot of farmers?
I think so. I think that's what, there's a lot more of that going on now. There's more training being done on animal handling, especially now with social media and videos being taken out of context. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think happens is, animals can be frustrating. You can lose your temper sometimes, and that's unfortunate. And you have to learn to control yourself. And unfortunately, things happen sometimes. People lose their temper, but it's not I don't think it's a pandemic or epidemic.
Okay.
And I think that most producers understand that and are going to take action.
Okay.
If they see mistreatment of their animals.
And along with that, we've talked about this quite a bit in previous episodes about antibiotics.
Yes.
And we don't want our animals to suffer. So when they get sick, we treat them, but it's not. We don't overtreat.
Right.
Right.
Well, it goes back to the thing I said before. They're businessmen. They're not idiots.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it costs money. Antibiotics aren't free. And I had someone asked me once, well, you don't give your cows antibiotics, do you? I said, well, of course we do. I said, because she had a daughter with her. I said, so does your daughter ever get sick? Yeah. Does she ever have antibiotics prescribed? Well, yeah. I said, well, it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I said, if you want them to get well, sometimes you need to use them. But I said, why would we give antibiotics if it's not needed?
Mm-hmm.
It's a waste of money.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to be profitable. We don't want to spend money where it doesn't need to be spent for no purpose.
Right. Same thing with like other vaccines and hormones. Is it all the same principle?
Right. It really is. It's what's best for the animal, makes it most efficient. You know, the thing, it's just unfortunate character that people have come up with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just what's best for the animal. People get vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people are treated with steroids and hormones for other things. I mean, it's no different, and
Mm-hmm.
it's always under the direction of a veterinarian. You know, it's not just a bunch of ogres out there sticking needles in cows and giving them things that they don't need or don't know what they're for.
Okay.
And so, I think it's unfortunate that caricature is out there.
Another aspect of farming is the treatment of the land and the environment. So how should we care for the environment?
Well, again, it's a resource given to us by God to use for the good of mankind and for the good of the animals. And so, again, being responsible, using it, using all the resources in an efficient way, and really, on that point, dairying from 1944 till now, we have drastically reduced the number of cows being milked, the amount of water being used, the amount of land being used to produce even more milk than we did in 1944. I forget exactly the graph I saw, but it was like, went from I think 40 million cows down to 9 million cows today,
Wow.
roughly. But we're making more milk than we were 40 years ago, but we're on like 10% of the land. And then, of course, what happens as you get the farms concentrated, though, you do have a larger amount of waste that needs to be dealt with. But again, you're not going to put the fertilizer on your field in excess of what it needs. You're going to do it what the crop needs to produce well. And so, again, they're businessmen. They're not idiots. They're not out there to rape the environment, because it's not going to take care of you. For us, we took care of the cows took care of us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a symbiotic relationship then.
For sure. And then other farmers also share this view. Like, would you say that the vast majority of farmers, dairymen, ranchers share that same thought that if you take care of your farm, your animals, they'll take care of you?
I really do, especially today, because the margins are so small. It's a business that your margins are pennies, not dollars. And the farmers that weren't taking care of their animals, they're out of business. It's not, nobody can afford to not be doing well with their animals, or they won't be in business anymore. So I think in that respect, this whole economy has probably helped eliminate a lot of farmers that might have been not as in tune with what their animals needed.
Okay. Is it wrong to let science influence farming, like with the use of antibiotics and pesticides and genetic engineering? We talked about antibiotics a little bit, but what are your thoughts about?
No, I think, in all aspects, science is just another tool, and some things work and some things don't, and as we find that out, we do what's best for the cows, and I think it's just smart. It's smart to use. I mean, if we didn't use science, we'd still be milking cows by hand in a bucket, straining the manure out of it when we brought it in the house to drink it. So, no, I think we should use all those tools in a responsible manner, of course.
If farmers, ranchers, and dairymen as a whole believe that we should care for our animals and we don't overuse antibiotics and all of these things. Why is it that so many people believe the opposite?
I think it gets back to worldview. And it also says in the book of Romans that they exchange the truth of God for a lie. And I think what happens is it turns everything upside down. So instead of it being God, man, the animals, or the created order, it's the created order and then man and then whatever. And so when you worship and serve the creation rather than the creator, you get everything mixed up. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking that, part of the problem is the personification of animals. And I think we can thank Walt Disney for that because, animals aren't people. I had a pastor friend say once, animals aren't people, but they're not nothing either. And I think that's what's important to remember is they're not people. They don't have feelings like we do. Sure, they feel pain and they can be content and they can be hungry, but they're not sitting around thinking about things. They're not philosophizing about what it would be like to be somewhere else. Mm-hmm. They exist, they're there, they're conscious of what's around them and of stressors, but they're not people. And so I think the problem is people put themselves in the place of the animals and say, man, if I was in a corral all day, I'd be miserable. Well, they're not miserable. They're getting all their needs met. They're getting fed. They're getting medical. They're seeing a doctor a couple times a month.
Yeah,
it's
much
more than I see a doctor.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And so, yeah, they're not people. And I think that's the problem is people try to project their human emotions and thoughts onto the animals, and it's a dead end. Mm-hmm. Because animals don't do that. In fact, I don't even know that animals do have the same sensibilities as we do as far as pain and stress goes. Their brains aren't, maybe getting in the weeds here, but the brain doesn't have the capacity to process all these things like, oh, I'm going to die, this isn't sustainable. That hurts. Mm-hmm. And so you should not hurt them because that hurts. But when they do get hurt, they don't think, oh, maybe I'm going to die. You might want to edit this out. We had a cow one time that left the barn and there was a sharp piece of metal sticking out of the fence, and she broke 2 ribs and tore her side open. And so we brought her back in, had the vet come to sew her up. She's standing there chewing her cud with her side hanging open. Mm-hmm. I thought, how is she doing that? I mean, I was about passing out looking at it. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it hurt at the time, but but they're not people. Mm-hmm. And so animals don't have the same, it doesn't mean they're not important, it doesn't mean we don't take care of them, but they just don't think and feel like we do. Mm-hmm. And so when you get that confused, then you start coming up with these things that, oh, look how mean these dairymen are. They're keeping these cows all penned up and they should be free. If they were free, where are they going to get food and water? Mm-hmm. They're going to have to work for it. Mm-hmm. It's just right. It's just unfortunate. I think it's a lack of education and a lack of really thinking critically about what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. I think also part of it is those videos we see of when people do abuse animals, which is horrible and shouldn't happen, but then those get circulated a lot too. And so I think, I'm guilty of it too. I'll see a video on Instagram or something, and then I just automatically associate whatever that thing was, like this is what it always is, but
you have to be careful that it's not out of context or set up. There's people that do horrible things to people. Mm-hmm. But we don't think everybody's horrible like that, do we? Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate. Like I say, the world's fallen, and it's not perfect. Mm-hmm. But by and large, people don't treat people horribly, and people don't treat animals horribly by and large. Mm-hmm. And when they do, they should be prosecuted, which a lot of times they are. Mm-hmm.
Looking ahead to the future, do you see possible improvement in the area of caring for land and animals, or do you think it'll largely remain how it is right now?
No, I think there's improvement. I think one of the improvements is going to be robotics in milking. I know people, again, the people that think, oh, we're so horrible to the animals are going to take exception, but the robots, the cows like it. They're not stressed. They get milked as often as they want. And in fact, I don't know if you remember, but Cheney, I think was their name, and they had a farm where they had robots and they also sold ice cream. Well, one visitor was upset because she wanted to see where the person was forcing those cows into that robot milker. And he said, there's no one forcing those cows in. So he took her, brought her in, showed the queue of cows waiting in line to come in and be milked. Nobody was forcing them. And I think that's going to be really the future, not only because of, acquiring the proper labor or trying to get good labor, but the fact that it's on the animal schedule. So I think that'll be an improvement as far as helping minimize stresses on cattle, and then whatever medical or other technologies come to bear.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add or talk about with this subject?
No, I just, again, like you had said, unfortunately, there's a lot of negative opinions out there that get made into movies and spread false information. But milk in itself is one of the most tested foods you can eat. Every load is tested for antibiotics. It's tested for bacteria. No other food you're buying does every load of every load of vegetables doesn't get sampled and tested. Mm-hmm. So it's a safe, good product.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.